Hello and welcome to World in Union, Balls.ie's weekly rugby show, getting an outside perspective on Irish rugby and on the game itself. I'm Mick McCarthy alongside Maurice Brosnan as always. Maurice, how are you?
Great, Mick. Yeah, how about you?
Well, I'm fantastic, and I'll tell you why, because it's five short days, 5 short winter days from the start of the Six Nations. 4 short days, and 5 days before Ireland versus England and the real kickoff of the Six Nations in the Aviva Stadium, and I can't bloody wait.
Do you know, like at one stage it felt like it was coming too soon, like after Christmas, the turn around the month, and then last week you had the kind of the circus that is the Six Nations launch, and all of a sudden you're absolutely geared up for straight away after that.
It's funny, isn't it? You finish the Heineken Cup and it's like you know, geez, there's only 2 weeks to go here. This isn't long enough. We need more build-up time. We need more talks about team selections, and we need, we can't be playing England straight away. We're not geared up for it, and you just have that 1 week with a little bit lower level rugby, and suddenly you're like, oh, it's here, it's coming. So really, really excited about that, if you couldn't tell. We're going to talk a good bit about England this week. We mentioned last week that we would. We're going to talk to Charlie Morgan at the Telegraph and just get that perspective on England and on how they're doing outside of what we've been specifically reading about them in the last few weeks, but a team that we're definitely a little bit worried about. They had a very good November. Eddie Jones may have found his mojo a little bit, which is evidenced by the way he's talking up Ireland with the kind of glint in his eye, as Eddie Jones is prone to do. Before we get to Charlie though, and we'll talk about the rest of the Six Nations as well, our run is over, unfortunately.
Yeah,
I can't sit here and claim once again at the start of the show that it was 4 wins from 4 for the Irish provinces this week. It just didn't happen. Connacht beaten.
There's a bit
Munster had a bit of a miracle win.
Is there a small bit of it, like if a tree falls in a forest and numbers down, does it make a sound vibe about the
It's true. It's true. Would anyone have noticed if I didn't bring up this our end of a stat and then just in 3 or 4 weeks mentioned 4 from 4 again, our perfect record continues? Because Connacht didn't win, and neither did Ulster. But Ulster did get a kind of a miracle draw at home to Benetton, to Treviso. I don't know. Benetton is just a weird name for a team. But 17-10 down. Treviso have the ball. There's 1 second to go, and Nigel Owens blows the whistle. Penalty to Ulster. 2 minutes later, penalty try to Ulster, and it's a 17-all draw. And blushes are spared somewhat.
Yeah,
it's still not a great result.
Dan McFarlane did say that it was a draw that felt like a loss.
Yeah.
I think that's probably fair enough. It's a result that has massive repercussions in terms of their hopes for European rugby again next year. I think Benetton have been in such amazing form this year, and their kind of standings at the minute reflect that, but they're going to be decimated by the Six Nations. I mean, we talk about Leinster being able to cope with depth. There's other teams like Benetton who provide a similar, percentage of players to the national team, but don't have the same depth to cope for that. So that's just going to be a really tricky couple of weeks for them.
Yeah, but they've had an unreal year, and it is funny though, because I was talking to somebody, and I won't say who it was, about this, and the perception of Benetton isn't that they've been outstanding, but it is in praise of their coaching and in the way they play to their level. Like, this isn't an insult at all, but it's that they drag you down to their level. It's very hard to go out and play the kind of rugby you're playing every week when you're playing against this team who are just drilled in a certain way. And it's like, in some ways, so bad. Yeah. But they're getting results. And it's just, that's exactly what you need to do if you've got a talent deficit. And it's actually really, really in high praise of their coaching and the way they're set up. And it's actually really interesting to see. It's the first time we've had a genuinely competitive Italian team since they've joined the Celtic League. Yeah,
which is going to be crucial for, you would hope, for Six Nations to become that bit more competitive. It's funny, we chatted about this off air as well, about Sergio Parisse, who was talking about he actually gave some really interesting comments last week. Like, he revealed that he's now on 100 losses in his career out of 134 games, which is astonishing really when you think about it. Like, I was looking at the most capped players. I think Parisse is 4th, but the rest of the players are like Australian, South African, Irish. There's no so-called weaker nations within that bracket. Yeah. So he's definitely also one of the most talented number 8s ever, but also the most losses in international rugby ever. But something he said away from that was that one thing that Conor O'Shea did really well when he convinced him to stay. He was initially considering retiring in 2015, and Conor O'Shea convinced him to stay, And together, they've done some work with Zebre and with Benetton/Treviso in terms of developing there. So that was a part of Conor O'Shea's brief. It wasn't just it was to bring the whole thing above board, and you're kind of seeing the fruit of that work, I think, now this season.
Definitely, and actually that was one of the reasons that we knew Conor O'Shea was probably a good appointment, was that it was a holistic role that kind of brought everything into it, and that was something that he has proven at as a kind of a former director of rugby before he was ever a coach with Quins. That was kind of that's the role that Conor O'Shea can do so well, and he did it like in English rugby as a whole as well before he kind of went to the more myopic role with Quins, you know. But yeah, look, I mean, there's lots to talk about there. We'll talk about Italy over the course of the next few weeks, I'm sure. They play Scotland this week. Generally, their main chance for a win. Historically, I don't know if it's quite the case anymore. France and Wales on Friday night is an amazing way to start the competition. But we're obviously focusing mainly on Ireland and England. Saturday night, the main event. What a way to start the tournament, really, for Ireland, defending Grand Slam champions, with the visit of England. And we want to find a little bit more out about England now, and would like to say we've got Charlie Morgan of the Telegraph on the line. Charlie, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. Thank you for being with us. Charlie, I just want to start with a couple of quotes from one Eddie Jones. You may have heard of him. Ireland are the best team in the world. The pressure is all on Ireland. Ireland have got to carry all the weight of the pressure. Eddie Jones just playing his usual kind of England are the paupers. We're just going to play what are basically the new All Blacks of World Rugby.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be really interesting to see his facial expression while he was saying that. I imagine he was either grinning or grinding his teeth or both, I would have thought.
It's just classic Jones, though, isn't it? It's you don't know whether you're gonna, hear him completely big up his team and make it out like the opposition are absolutely nothing, and we just have to concentrate on our own game, or whether it's kind of like, what's the point in us even turning up? He's always kind of up to something with the mind games, isn't he?
Yeah, completely. It's been fascinating to see an operator like him in the Six Nations kind of atmosphere, because we have the Six Nations launch, and it always seems to be a race to be labelled as underdogs. And Stuart Lancaster's England were probably the same. They were a bit tentative about being favourites. Jones came in and was, from the off, he targeted a Grand Slam, and then this Ireland resurgence, you can tell it really hasn't sat well with him at all. And understandably, he's really competitive, but I think it's really got under his skin. I think either last year or the year before, I remember somebody asking him a question and him saying, well, Ireland are the favourites. Do you not want to talk about how Ireland are going to play? And it's that dynamic has been fascinating to have. And Eddie Jones is a hard-nosed winner. He's been successful most places he's been, with intense methods. To have him around this tournament has been really interesting. And now that England are underdogs, given how Ireland have played and their success recently, and how much depth they've developed, what their tactical identity is, it's just really interesting to see how he's reacting to it.
Yeah, absolutely, and always interesting in how he does. But in terms of himself and his job, like, it was a lot of negative momentum kind of last year through the Six Nations into the summer, and November kind of rescued that a little bit. And that there was that, like, obviously should have beaten the All Blacks, won the rest of the games. It feels like it's the first time in over a year now that there's just a little bit of momentum kind of with England, and I don't know whether that's kind of translated into the press relations with the team or anything like that, but it does feel like the pressure isn't quite the same as it was a couple of months ago.
I think that's a really interesting point. I think Jamie George made it. I think he's made it made the point over in Portugal during the training camp that England felt like they were chasing their tail during last season's Six Nations, and then they went to South Africa. They had the Vunipolas back for South Africa, but and started brilliantly. I think that's kind of, they were on fire for that first quarter of that first test, and then everything seemed to fade away for the rest of those first two tests. They lost the series, won the final game, but then the autumn was fascinating because he didn't have Billy Vunipola, didn't have Nathan Hughes, he didn't have that keynote carrier in the back row. So it was a real test of Eddie Jones' coaching, and kind of as an extension of that, his decision to bring in John Mitchell. And John Mitchell's, so as the kind of defensive guru, as a replacement for Paul Gustard, but also as a specialist back row kind of mentor. and it really was a kind of endorsement I felt of Eddie Jones, the coach, the technical coach, the guy who can tailor game plans towards what he's got, as far as a squad and as far as the kind of the respective gifts that he's got at his disposal. It was an impressive autumn from a coaching point of view, and I totally agree. Now that Sam Underhill's a big loss, because not only has he, I mean, you only have to look at his performance for Bath against Leinster at Bath. I think he got four or five turnovers on the deck, looked fantastic. His carrying's been really robust as a kind of in Billy Vunipola's absence. So to see those two together would have been great. That's a big loss. But having said that, the guys that are now fit for England, it's now beginning. Not at all to compare it to the All Blacks, but I always think when the All Blacks pick a team, you think, geez, God, they've got all of those players, and now they put them together on paper. When Eddie Jones picked his extended squad for the Six Nations, it was, wow, okay. Even though there are a few surprises, there are a few curveballs, as per usual with Eddie Jones, that group of players looks very, very strong.
Charlie, that's a really interesting point to make there about Eddie Jones, the coach, because I think one of the more remarkable quotes that came out of that press conference was the idea that Jack Nolan might play as a flanker. And a lot of people here, I think even us on this show, might have dismissed that. And then you wrote in your Daily Telegraph column about the idea that, this idea of challenging rugby orthodoxy isn't actually that out there, that it's been done before. You referenced Pat Lam, who we saw here with Connacht, and somebody who's doing it now in the Premiership. Like, is that, do you think, a realistic goal? Maybe not no, but certainly kind of an unconventional route that he'll take in this Six Nations?
I think it's been first of all, it's been an absolute treat to have Pat Lam over in England and being able to watch his Bristol side close to it. It's been awesome. I thought that was kind of a classic kind of distraction tactic, talking about Jack Noel. Jack Noel's always, Eddie Jones has used him previously in the Italy game, sort of no ruck gate. He brought on Jack Noel for Johnny May, I think, and just basically had him shadowing the scrum half just to make those runs around the fringes that he's so good at. He really likes the kind of the breakdown work that Jack Noel gets through, both in attack and defence. He's kind of whenever Jack Noel's playing for England, he's off his wing from set moves, burrowing either as a carrier or being that first man hitting the breakdown. So I think it was kind of I think more as sort of a commentary on Jack Noel as an all-round rugby player, as opposed to kind of anything more unconventional like that than that. Sorry. But yeah, I mean, just a classic curveball, really. He kind of, if the column inches were about that, they weren't about the fact that England probably don't know what their best midfield is. They still have got a few teething problems in the back row, and they picked and at scrum half they've picked a guy who's very talented, but for some reason Eddie Jones hasn't seen fit to kind of blood him before now. So a year out from, less than a year out, are we 8 months out now from the Rugby World Cup 2019, Dan Robson remains uncapped. He's a fantastic player, but he remains uncapped. And that just, that kind of reflects that maybe the planning hasn't been so joined up, or as joined up as it could be.
It's interesting we're talking about what Noel can offer outside of the traditional wingers' values, but because, we're talking about Vunipola maybe coming back into the England team, and that's a real boost for them as a ball carrying unit. But one of the places that they've been beaten against Ireland for the last 2 years really is on the ground. And we talk regularly on the show about the kind of the changing nature of turnovers and of everything like that, and basically you need specialists all around the field now. It's no longer good enough to have a kind of a 6 and 7 who can compete for the ball. You need them in various different places. How are England set up, in your opinion, for that, kind of coming into a team coming in against an opposition where really they have made that a speciality over the last couple of years?
Yeah, another really interesting question. There's the big kind of I guess another, I mean, this just speaks to how many different combinations Jones has at his disposal. But another big selection headache for him is fullback, and whether or not he goes back to Mike Brown. But a big reason for his fondness for Mike Brown over the years has been when he's been that last line of defence, he's got his head over the ball. He's either won turnovers or slowed down the kind of isolated ruck, so that the defence has been able to regroup. I think. Again, really interesting, you mentioned Billy Vunipola there. When Billy Vunipola is playing well as his carrying, as well as his distribution, he's getting his head over the ball. And he won a couple of turnovers against Glasgow Warriors in tandem with Maro Itoje. And when those two kind of combine in a similar way to maybe Omani and Standard do for Munster, in that, you know, they've got the jackler and then the tackler assist, kind of backing, doing a bit of slide backing into those kind of attacking players, attacking sports support players. I think England really improved at the breakdown during the autumn. Their ball retention was far better, and against, you know, even in the first game they were playing against you know, Malcolm Marks, who came in with this big reputation. He was going to destroy England's breakdown, and Dwayne Vermeulen was there as well. Dwayne Vermeulen had totally derailed them in the first couple of tests in South Africa early in the summer, but England were pretty good. Their ball retention over that, over those games was pretty good. They're going to have to, however the game goes, they're going to have to kind of absorb a lot of phase play pressure from Ireland, because Ireland's ball retention is just so good. With Tom Curry there, with Maro Itoje there, with Billy Vunipola there, and Jack Noel potentially, they've got those threats too, which is going to be important, because they're going to have to find a way to break up that pressure. So I mean, that's just another fascinating subplot. They're gonna have to be better there, because the pressure's coming on. The phase play pressure will come on from Ireland very hard.
It's funny, Charlie, as well, you know, talking about that. Like, I think it's just over a year now since Eddie Jones announced this kind of radical plan to improve the conditioning and fitness of his players. And I'm just kind of wondering, when do you expect to see the fruit of that? Like, I know there was a lot of, I suppose, you know, criticism of it last year, especially given the amount of injuries they're running up in training. Like, would you foresee that maybe this Six Nations, the last one before World Cup, we might see the result of all that hard work?
I think in fits and starts, they've shown the benefit of that conditioning over his tenure. I think where it's obviously fallen down is the attrition rate of the Premiership. When they've come into these campaigns, kind of players down. That's where the English kind of domestic system shows its flaws, for want of a better term. I think when he's got the squad together for a prolonged period before the World Cup, we might not see it till then. But yeah, there was all this talk of percentages and however many percent he's going to make them fitter, and however he measures that, whether it's time bouncing off the floor. But England have dogged out a lot of games under Eddie Jones. I think it is easy to forget that over the first couple of years, especially of his tenure, England weren't necessarily finding attacking fluidity, but what they were doing was dogging teams out. There's that remarkable defensive performance in Australia in the second test there. We have seen the benefit of Eddie Jones being an arduous taskmaster over time. I think now that he's kind of, and you always need a bit of fortune, I think, as an England head coach, as to how injuries fall in domestic and European competition. He has had that little bit of fortune heading into this Six Nations. There are, you know, he's got a lot of those frontline guys who he thought would be almost inked into his World Cup squad. A lot of those guys are fit. So yeah, it's kind of no excuses time, really.
Any worries at all from an English point of view about the performance in Europe of the club teams, or is that something that's so far sailed and so far away from the international game at this stage we don't really need to think about it? Obviously, Saracens still a force, as they kind of seemingly always have been, but nobody else into the quarterfinals of the Champions Cup. You
know, I think there was. I think we can probably treat those as separate issues. I think last year they probably were slightly more joined up, because what we were seeing was just seemingly a total inability for English players to react to sort of breakdown laws and things like that. And I think that's been straightened out by Eddie Jones. That certainly carried on into England's breakdown performances in the Six Nations. I don't think, you know, Eddie Jones might kind of deny that, but it certainly looked that way. I think they might have, well, unless the autumn is a false dawn, I think they might have sorted that out a little bit. So I think English clubs' success or otherwise is probably a separate issue to how they're going to play with England. I think Exeter, you know, we always knew that Saracens and Exeter, as far as how they're playing, how familiar they are with each other, their cohesion, their game plan, all of that, the squad depth, we always kind of knew that those two were quite a long way ahead compared to the other Premiership sides. And I thought that two of them would have enough to qualify. Exeter just messed up a home game against Gloucester and should have probably beaten Munster at home as well. and it shouldn't have been riding on that last game against Munster, which they were admirable in, but just probably didn't have quite enough. I don't think there can be any complaints that just Saracens go through, because I don't think, two would have been a bonus. Maybe if Gloucester had been in a separate group, they would have had a decent run at it if they'd kept everyone fit, if they'd had Mostert and Creel from the start. But I think they're separate issues, to be honest.
Okay. No, fair enough. Before we let you go, I just want to ask a little bit about Ireland and sort of the perception among maybe the English media or English rugby in general. Like, obviously, the success is there for the take. That it's obvious what they've done in the last couple of years and what position Ireland are in now. I'm just wondering, from the outside, is there a sense that this is a sustainable, easy for me to say, thing for Irish rugby, or is it kind of like, this is down to Joe Schmidt and a kind of a group of players coming together at the same time?
I think a bit of both, probably. I think it will be. I think what you've got with Joe Schmidt and someone like Andy Farrell is an amazingly complementary blend that they've got. They've got a guy who's seriously meticulous. I've been speaking to people over this last week for a feature on Joe Schmidt and how he put his strike moves together, and it's blown my mind. Speak to someone like Gervin Dempsey, who's worked with him before in Leinster, and the attention to detail. I know it's kind of, the story's kind of been around for a few years, but getting a real insight on that's been brilliant. The blend of that together with the kind of real fiery charisma that Andy Farrell offers, that's proven kind of unsurprisingly to be a really, really good blend. And as you say, those senior players, I think, are very special. I think Johnny Sexton, certainly Conor Murray, although it was fantastic that they beat the All Blacks without Conor Murray, and then without a load of Lions, actually. But then if you look at the guys coming through, that's a special crop as well. James Ryan's potentially going to be a totemic player for another decade. He's fantastic. He's superb player. Guys at Jacob Stockdale, potentially the same, although it will be in a totally different role. I hope it's sustainable, because it's been really cool to watch. What will be really interesting is how Andy Farrell goes as a head man, because maybe with that, and it remains to be seen whether we've seen how good he is in that restricted role as defence coach, as a guy who G's players up. He has that whatever it be, Thursday morning, Friday morning meeting where he ramps up the intensity. He's fantastic at that. He's a world leader at that. How he does as the top man, who he kind of appoints to be under him, will be fascinating. The signs are really good when you look at someone like Joe Carberry, when he's had more game time. It's brilliant. And the emergence. I mean, Dan Levy, we're not talking about him necessarily in the lead up to this tournament, whether he was an absolute rock star in the last tournament. So there's depth. There's fantastic depth there. There's a game plan that they can build on. I do believe it's sustainable. Yeah.
No, it's just because in November a new timeline starts on Irish rugby, which is, I think, PS post or PJ post Joe, and we're all very scared, and we just kind of need some reassurance from the outside sometimes, I think. Charlie, before we go, call it for Saturday.
Ireland, but it'll be close. I think be very, very close.
Okay. And you think where do you think England's kind of position is in the Six Nations realistically then?
Yeah, I think Wales will. Oh, they've been my pick from a long way out to win it. I just think Warren Gatland's played an absolute blinder this World Cup cycle, and he's peaking brilliantly. They've got Ireland at home, and they're not scared of Ireland, aren't they? The only side that Joe Schmidt has a below 50% win rush against. They're just not intimidated by Ireland in a way that I think other sides around the world are now. I think that England's best chance. They've, in previous visits to Dublin, haven't they? They've gone behind quite early and just been strangled. I think if they get a lead early on, then they might have a chance, and then that changes their whole kind of whole setup of the tournament. So that's a really interesting one. But yeah, I think Ireland put one.
We'll take that. I think we'd always take that against England. Charlie Morgan, Daily Telegraph, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me again. Cheers, lads.
Great stuff there, Charlie Morgan. We'll definitely talk to Charlie again. That was really insightful and enjoyable. Funny, we were talking off air not too long ago, about 2 minutes before we started the show, and you were telling me that Wales were were the ones who were going to throw the spanner in the works this year.
Now I can't use that point because it was like I'm parrot and an expert.
I didn't even say it in the intro because I didn't know that was coming up. I've totally undermined you here, but I will say, for honesty's sake, you have the exact same opinion as Charlie.
I don't think it's necessarily that controversial opinion. Wales have the 2 hardest games at home this year. They're in amazing form, as we spoke to Ben James about this before the year. Gatton seems primed for this tournament. The only negative is their number 8 Faletau, who's broken his arm, is now out, which is a massive loss, as it would be for anyone. But other than that, I think they could be a potential dark horse this tournament. Yeah.
Wanted to talk a little bit about Andy Farrell there. Charlie was just talking about him. It's something that dawned on me now. It's happened for a couple of years, so it's not exactly a novelty at the moment. But it does constantly surprise me that the key as a defensive coach to stopping England is to stop Owen Farrell. Rugby is a violent and aggressive sport. So you would say then, if you just want to take a few liberties in adding 2 and 2 together and maybe getting 5 or 6, Andy Farrell's entire job this week, is to devise a game plan to hurt his son physically.
Yeah, I mean, I remember a press briefing where
it's weird, like, isn't it?
Yeah, big time. Like I remember at a press conference, somebody made a joke that would Andy Farrell be, feeding his son information about the Ireland defensive game before the game, and he definitely didn't think it was that funny.
No.
But I suppose it's kind of a weird dichotomy.
But what's funny about that is that was like the most insulting thing that could ever be asked, and Andy Farrell's a professional, and
oh, absolutely,
he would never. No, but what I'm saying is that I don't understand why that's so. I love my job. I take it very seriously. I do it to the best of my ability. But I would choose my son over my job. I don't have a son, so maybe it's easy for me to say. But I would, you would like to think that. But maybe that's outside the game then. That's not something that Owen Farrell would want either. And, that's it. They're 2 different things. But, it is a weird situation that, he's the number 10. He's the guy that you have to stop. He's the guy that you're thinking, you're there telling Sean O'Brien or someone, you're saying, right, you have to be ready to go to hit the ruck at it, because this is when Owen's going to kick the ball. This is the way he sets up, so you have to be off there and you have to get to him first and knock him down, and basically target him or run at his channels, run through him, knock him over head first if you have to. What kind of language is being used?
I guess his language, from his own perspective, he'd probably talking about the defence as more of a collective, we're not stopping one player, we're stopping England, or
my arse. You have to stop the 10, or you have to target him in defence. You have to try and get him in there with and Owen Farrell's liable to give away a penalty in the way he tackles you. You can't say, well, sure, that's not defence coach, I suppose. Yeah, but that'll be his job next year.
Yeah, as a head coach. Yeah.
Look, I don't know.
Maybe it works in both ways. I read a weird side point. I read Stephen Hunt in the Sunday Pennant yesterday. He was writing that he used to ring Irish teammates who played for other championship clubs to get their starting team before games, so he'd be able to feed it back. It was in this whole Bielsa Spygate subplot, and that he used to. So maybe Farrell can tell his dad who's going to be starting 9, will it be Robinson or Youngs, and that will benefit Ireland.
Just in the interweek chit chat, it just happens to come up, and Andy goes, "Don't worry, mate, I won't tell anyone that." And then he just off and go, "Joe, you won't believe it."
Robson starting.
We mentioned Charlie also mentioned Dan Levy there as someone that we're not talking about. We were looking at him like he didn't make the fitness test to play, weekend, which was unfortunately Leo Cullen was saying his calf just isn't there yet at the moment. That's kind of annoying for Ireland and annoying for Schmidt, but you think it's something that if he is almost there, he could come back in pretty quickly and he could play a part later in the year. And it's funny the way we're talking about who are these future superstars. Levy is someone that is very rarely mentioned in Ireland. We talked about him a little bit, and he's someone that had such a huge impact. But it's interesting to hear, Charlie, when we're talking about that outside perspective, that he's in that list with James Ryan and with these guys, and with Stockdale, because he did have such a huge impact in the Six Nations. It's easy to forget sometimes the specifics of the games 12 months ago.
And it's funny, I guess, when you're analysing an opponent, like we might talk about England, and like I know we asked about Vunipola or the likes of somebody like Jack Noel, who are these kind of eye-catching, 50-yard breaks, a steamroller in Vunipola's case. But then you got somebody like, for example, Sam Underhill, who in the same vein as Levy probably isn't the exact like eye-catching player, but he's so explosive and such a kind of fiend. Like he would inhibit as an opponent, you'd need to do more analysis of what he's going to do than these players who what they're going to do. It's just about trying to stop them.
Yeah, and it's definitely notable that when we're talking about England's chances, him being missing is the first thing that comes up.
Yeah,
when we're talking to Charlie, like, so that that's how that goes. These players are so important. The one question, we picked the team on last week's show, and I suppose there's very few extra questions or anything that's changed since then, but one of them will be Rob Kearney. We didn't mention Leinster earlier. Leinster kind of did what they do against the Scarlets at the weekend, where they didn't play well, looked like they weren't going to win, and just find a result out of nowhere despite not playing well. But one of the big talking points coming out of that game was that Rob Kearney did come back from injury but did not play well, was caught a lot in defence, and especially just reading like some of the reports and the way people watching it on Twitter. I didn't see it live, I saw it afterwards. It didn't look as bad, but live people were like, God, like Kearney has been absolutely roasted here, he can't play next week. My thoughts on it, and I'll get yours, is that like there's an element of Kearney kind of saving himself. There's also a lot of credit in the bank after the year he had last year, and he just does seem to find his form when he needs to for Ireland. And he's done, like, we've been worried about him coming into games before, wondering was it the conservative selection to pick him, and he's gone out and said absolutely not.
Yeah,
I'm the right man for the job.
I mean, I guess from a Joshua perspective, you'd be I'd be less concerned because it wasn't, it was like bad reads, or he was out of position for a tackle and got caught badly, which is something that's eye-catching. And so you were talking about the reaction on Twitter. People are obviously going to be caught by that when players effectively bypass and he's kind of diving after somebody. But it wasn't, it didn't look like he didn't look unfit. He didn't look his kind of jumping into the line when he was in attacking stuff that looked solid. He was fine on the high ball. It was more so just this kind of like I think
but
this game
that people will immediately mistake for missing a step.
Yeah. So like
losing a step.
Exactly. Yeah. Which I don't think there was certainly not in perceivable signs of that last night or on Friday night. I think that game for people like Kearney or for McGrath was just to get minutes under their belt. Like McGrath came off after 50 minutes. Kearney wasn't long after him. When you're watching that game, the stand-up performers aren't ever going to be them. They're going to be the likes of O'Loughlin or O'Brien or Kieran Frawley. I think looks like a really good player there. I would have. Yeah. They're kind of the stand-up moment. So I wouldn't be overly concerned. I still think if he's fit, he starts, and he demonstrated that he was fit on Friday night.
I think that too. Do you think Ireland will win?
I do. I would. Yeah. I mean, to copy what Charlie said earlier again. I think it'll be probably a one-score game. I think it'll be very close, but I do think Ireland will win at home, especially.
Yeah. I just remember we playing them, like sometimes there's just a general fear there. In England we're a little bit in free fall, but I watched about 20 minutes of like 20-minute highlights package of the Twickenham game, the Grand Slam game, like 2 or 3 weeks ago. I kind of came across it by accident and decided to watch it, and I was amazed at how little specifics I remembered of the game. But what I did remember all the way through was how comfortable Ireland were. Like we got those early tries and never ever looked like not winning the game. It was almost an anticlimax.
Yeah,
we had the Grand Slam won in Twickenham kind of early in the game. Now the scoreline wouldn't suggest that, but the reality of watching it, we never felt under pressure. And I do have to bear that in mind, that I think we just might be a better team than England at the moment, and we are at home and haven't lost in the Six Nations at home since 2013.
Yeah,
that's an insane record. It's 2019 now, by the way.
Despite the fact that like they traditionally start tournaments slow, I mean, like the France game is the classic example last year in terms of what happened there. But just in terms generally, they kind of ease themselves into tournaments, so which is like maybe slight encouragement for England. I still think they'll win. Yeah,
I have a very natural worry just because it's England and because you don't know what to expect and because we haven't seen Ireland since November. But we really should have more faith in this team, is what I'm trying to say, at least assume that they're going to win. And if they don't, they don't, and we'll discuss why next week. Other 2 games, really looking forward to both of them. And that is France against Wales. I think in Ireland we're hoping for given what we're talking about with Wales, but I think these games are always interesting. The Friday night Wales games are always fun. France, their home opener last year was kind of memorable against us. If we got the same game again, we'd take it. But I don't know, France, we never know what they're going to be until they play.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on, like, you looking back at, the November internationals. Is it the France that played against Fiji, or is it the France that played against South Africa that are going to turn up? And depending on which one turns up, they'll beat Wales or they'll lose by 30 points.
We'll also very, very quickly mention France back in proper blue jerseys with white and red trim, white shorts, red socks. All 6 teams this year wearing the right colours.
Yeah.
And my God, what a refresh. Actually, for the first time ever, because we're the only ones who never really go away from it, Ireland are probably with our kind of weird green mermaid jerseys, are probably the furthest away from the traditional.
Yeah, from the probably, yeah.
Which we've never been. We've always been right there in the middle. We've never changed. We're the only team in the Six Nations that have never changed our home gear.
Yeah,
and for that I am proud of it. A proud Irishman. I'm very into kits, as you might know.
I think it's still pretty much green. It's just like a mishmash of various.
Oh yeah,
greens.
no. It's absolutely fine. It's just that given everybody's gone back traditional for once, the other side of it. Yeah. No, it's a very weird jersey, I have to say. It really is. Anyway, last game. Italy, home to Scotland. Traditionally, Italy's big chance of a win. You catch Scotland, your home game. You might catch them, before they kind of get into the swing of the tournament.
Yeah.
They'll be looking at Ireland in Murrayfield the week after for sure. Any chance?
No, but I think
because this isn't the old Scotland. That's the problem.
Yeah, exactly. And they especially the kind of like there might not be. Charlie said there's not a big connection between the English clubs and the English national team. I think there is when it comes to Scotland. I think you've seen kind of the boom of some really talented players who I think Gregor Townsend can kind of mould moving forward with them.
Yeah. So both teams in the quarterfinals.
I think it's imperative for Italy to be competitive in that game though, because if they fade away again, like they just can't. You can't persist to be continually the lame dog in a tournament. Like it doesn't work like that. And I think for the sake of it being kind of a great tournament, I really hope that they can put up a fight, and not just in the Scotland game, across the board.
For the whole tournament, because last year just wasn't that for the most part, unfortunately. Can't wait for it. There's more this weekend as well. It all starts Friday night, of course, in Paris, but there's also games on Friday night in Irish Independent Park in Cork, where the under-20s, the Irish under-20s, take on England, and of course then we have the women also taking on England
in Energia Park,
and Energia Park. So kind of worried a little bit about that one, I have to be honest. I'm looking forward to seeing the women's team a little bit this year, just to see how, as we kind of mentioned it last week, there's kind of a sort of a resetting and a younger generation coming through. But England, unfortunately, are basically the All Blacks of women's rugby, and that's going to be very, very tough. But we'll talk more in depth about them as the Six Nations goes on from next week on, and we'll. I'm going to the under-20s game in Cork actually, so I'm looking forward to that, and I'll talk a little bit about that next Tuesday as well. Yeah,
in a similar vein, I guess there's a lot of really exciting, a lot of younger Irish players and their younger brothers playing in that team. You've got Harry Byrne, younger Weasley, Scanlon's brother is also there as well. So that's kind of a nice up. And there's also just some really talented prospects coming through.
Definitely.
I know the Irish women are missing a couple of players with sevens as well, which obviously isn't ideal with the Six Nations, but there's, for both of those teams, some really kind of exciting prospects that it's kind of the dawn of a new wave almost. For
it does feel like that for the women's team for sure. Yeah, and I'd definitely like to look into it a little bit more and see the game now on Friday and kind of see where they are and maybe have a chat about it. They'll obviously be in Scotland for the second game, and by the time we speak to you again, that's where they'll be heading, and we'll know a little bit more about them. We are unfortunately out of time because we could get pumped up for the Six Nations all the way. But look, if you've listened to us, you're an hour closer to the start of the Six Nations, and for that I'm sure you are grateful. Hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back with you next Tuesday when Ireland will be well on the way to yet another Grand Slam.